So, I heard that you want to start showing some ads to your users, but you had some questions. Like if I start showing ads to my users, will they stick around my app? And if showing ads is okay, how many ads is too many ads so that I can balance earning some revenue while keeping my users happy? Well, I have some good news for you. There's a way to solve these questions once and for all. But first, we'll need a framework. So, figuring out that you need to show ads to your users in order to monetize your app and earn some revenue isn't hard. What is hard is figuring out things like how often you should show ads to your users. Because probably much like yourself, your users would rather see less ads than more ads when using your app. Unless viewing ads is kind of your thing, and hey, I can't blame you. There's some pretty good ones out there. But the problem can get much more complicated than just how often to show ads to your users, because you have different kinds of users who have different levels of tolerance or desire for viewing ads. For example, some might only use your app for a few minutes a day, while others might spend hours on it, and others might only like that new cat meme generator you added in, but not much else. Well, these kinds of complex problems are exactly why we created the Optimize Your App Revenue series. In our first season, we'll be focusing on using Firebase and AdMob. Each episode in this series will focus on a specific ad experiment where we'll be answering questions like the one on ad frequency, but go even further to things like experimenting to find the right balance between in-app purchase revenue and ad revenue, to optimizing ad reward amounts with in-game currency, and many other topics. You'll learn how to design the experiment and how to implement it in your platform of choice, whether that's Unity, Android, or iOS, and then learn how to analyze the experiment results to see if you've discovered a new way to optimize your app revenue. But before we get into answering those questions, we'll need an experimentation methodology we can use to solve them, and a framework of products we can use to implement some solutions. Now, if you're coming to this video from the AdMob YouTube channel and just finished watching the first episode on using AdMob and Firebase, you're already familiar with the experimentation methodology part of this video. So feel free to skip ahead to the framework section using the chapters on the video timeline. And if you're coming from the Optimize Your App Revenue video from our last Firebase Summit, you're already familiar with both the experimentation methodology and the framework, and even how to solve a few questions at a high level. So move on to the next video to start testing some new ad experiments. The links to both of these videos are in the description. They are by no means a prerequisite to following along with the rest of this series though, so stick around as we cover the basics you need to know to implement some ad strategies. Okay, so let's talk about the experimentation methodology we're going to use to design and solve our ad experiment questions. In our case, we're going to use A/B testing. If you're unfamiliar with A/B testing, it essentially amounts to exposing different variants or experiences to a subset of users and figuring out which one works better based on some goals or metrics that we care about. The general name for those two variants, supposing we have two of them, are variant A and variant B, hence the term A/B testing. That being said, there are times when using A/B testing to solve a question is appropriate and other times when it is not. A/B testing is most effective when you can hypothesize that there is some variant or way of achieving a goal that can outperform another. For example, if I'm making a game, I can hypothesize that making the game too hard could discourage players from sticking with it, while making it too easy could make the game too boring and lead them to quitting it altogether. There's probably a middle ground that is the best option to keep users engaged, and if I pose the question, what game difficulty keeps my users the most engaged? I can use A/B testing to find out if there is a difficulty sweet spot for my game. Coming back to our ad experimentation questions, I can use A/B testing to answer questions like, how frequently should I show ads to my users, with the goal of optimizing my ad revenue and also tracking secondary goals like user retention and engagement to check if any of the variants are having any negative impacts on my user experience. Now, there are also times when A/B testing isn't the right approach to figure out an ad strategy, such as figuring out if I should show ads in my app in the first place or not. We're not going to cover that here, but stay tuned for episode number 3 where we tackle that exact topic. So that lays out the experimentation methodology we're going to use to solve most of the ad strategies we'll explore in this series. The next thing we need is a framework of products that will allow us to implement these ad strategies into our apps. Let's get into what products we'll need to make all of this happen. First up, we'll need Google AdMob, because that's how we're going to add some ads into our apps. Next, we're going to use Google Analytics because that is what will allow us to measure the impact of our ad experiments via metrics like user retention, ad revenue, purchase revenue, and so forth. And finally, we're going to use Firebase Remote Config and A/B testing because that's what will allow us to create different ad variants in our experiments and deploy them to our target users. Now let's walk through how to add all the products in this framework to your Firebase project. Now I'm assuming you already have a Firebase project with an app configured on it, but if you don't, check out the link in the description on getting started with Firebase and come on back. Okay, now let's start adding some SDKs. We're going to start with Google Analytics. So first, to enable Google Analytics on your project, if you haven't already, just go into the Firebase console, to the Analytics section, and click on the Enable Google Analytics button, and then create or select your Google Analytics account that you want to use for your project. Click on Enable Google Analytics one more time, and you're all set to go. To add the Google Analytics SDK to your Android project, just add the Firebase-Analytics library in your build.gradle file, and it'll be added to your project. On iOS, just add and install the Firebase/Analytics pod. And for Unity, just add the Firebase Analytics.Unity package to your project. Now let's add the Google AdMob SDKs into the mix. So here, I'm assuming that you've already created a Google AdMob account and your AdMob app. But if not, check out the links on the Getting Started with AdMob in the description to create and set them both up. It's all very straightforward and will probably be faster for you to just go ahead and create that directly rather than walk through it here. So go ahead if you haven't created that yet, I'll be waiting. One important thing I did want to call out here though, is that after creating your Google AdMob account and AdMob app, you'll need to enable user metrics and link your AdMob app to your Firebase project. To do that, just navigate to your app in the AdMob console, click on the user metrics section, and click on the checkbox to enable user metrics and save your settings. Note that this process can take a while, so you may have to come back to the page after some time before user metrics are fully enabled and you can go on to link your app to Firebase. Once it is ready, just click on the Link to Firebase button, check out and confirm the policy, select your Firebase project, and hit Continue and finally done. This link is what enables the flow of Google Analytics and AdMob metrics back and forth, and it's also what allows Firebase Remote Config and A/B testing to implement all the neat ad experiments that we want to try. By the way, if you haven't created ads using Google AdMob before, one cool thing to know about them is that they're pretty configurable. You can set things like how frequently you want an ad to show up in your app for your users, how much reward or virtual coins or in-game currency you want to award when someone finishes viewing an ad, and a bunch of other stuff. We're going to play around with a lot of these settings when we get to implementing our ad strategies and A/B tests in each episode, so I wanted to mention them here for now. Now to add AdMob into your application, you'll just need to add the AdMob SDK and specify your AdMob app ID so that the SDK can reference it in your application code. If you already configured this when creating your AdMob account and linking to Firebase, skip to the Remote Config Setup chapter using the video timeline right here. Otherwise, let's configure the AdMob SDK into our projects. So on Android, that means adding the com.google.android.gms Play Services Ads SDK in your app-level build.gradle file and updating your Android manifest file to include your AdMob app ID. On iOS, you would add the Google Mobile Ads SDK target to your project's pod file and install it via the pod install repo update command, as well as add your AdMob app ID to your app's info.plist file. And for Unity, you'll need to download and import the Mobile Ads Unity plugin. For Android, you'll also need to include the Mobile Ads SDK in the Unity Android Resolver, and you'll also need to add your AdMob app ID by visiting the Assets Google Mobile Ads settings page. The links to all the AdMob Getting Started guides for each platform are linked in the description, so if you want to set those up now, please go ahead and take a minute to do so. Next, we're going to add remote config and A/B testing into our project. In case you haven't used remote config before, you can think of it as a set of key value pairs that live in the cloud and that can change the look and feel of your app based on user-specific conditions that you can configure on the fly. In the case of our ad experiments, we'll be able to use remote config to create different ad experiment variants and choose specific audiences that we want to expose those variants to. The A/B testing part of the framework is what allows us to create and run our experience and analyze the experiment results as we start deploying variants to our users. To add both of these products to your application project, you just need to add the Remote Config SDK. Firebase A/B testing is built on top of Remote Config, so you can get both products enabled just by adding the Remote Config SDK. So for Android, just add the com.google.firebase firebase-config library to your app-level build.gradle file. On iOS, just add and install the Firebase Remote Config pod to your pod file, and for Unity, just add the Firebase Remote Config.unity package to your project. Okay, and now that you've added all the necessary SDKs to your project, your app is now set up with the framework. Trademark pending. You're now ready to start implementing some ad experiments. Why don't we start with our first one? How often should you show ads to your users? Would you like to know? Well, check out the next episode. Oh, and if you like this series and all the new content we produce on the Firebase channel, please give us a like or subscribe. See you in the next episode.